The air was heavy, with the kind of silence that presses against your chest, a quiet so deep it feels like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something to break. At 1:00 a.m., my phone vibrated against the dashboard, the DoorDash app flashing with a new order that yanked me out of my late-night haze. I was 3 hours into my shift, weaving through the empty streets of a small forested town where the trees seemed to lean in closer with every mile. The order was simple, but strange. A single bottle of cheap red wine from a gas station convenience store to be delivered to an address buried deep in the woods. My stomach twisted, not from fear, not yet, but from that faint, nagging instinct that whispers when something feels off. I ignored it, like always, because that's what you do when rent is due and the night is long. I'd been driving for DoorDash for months, my full-time gig since the factory layoffs hit. Most nights, I'd push my start time later and later, letting the hours slip until the world was asleep and I was alone with the hum of my engine and the occasional flicker of a streetlight. Tonight was no different. Another late start at 10:00 p.m., chasing orders through a town where the houses grew sparser and the forests thicker. The gas station was a lonely beacon in the dark, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly as I stepped inside. The cashier, a tired-looking man with gray stubble, barely glanced up as I grabbed the bottle of wine, its label peeling at the edges like it had been sitting on the shelf for years. I checked the order on my phone, confirming the details, and headed back to my car. The address was 15 minutes away, a winding route through roads that seemed to dissolve into the wilderness. The forest closed in around me as I drove the headlights, carving thin slices of light through the endless black. The trees were tall and gnarled their branches, interlocking overhead like skeletal fingers blocking out the moon. Every curve of the road felt like it was leading me deeper into nowhere, the kind of place where you could scream and no one would hear. I turned up the radio to drown out the silence, but the static-filled music only made the emptiness feel louder. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel, the plastic creaking under my grip. As I followed the GPS, the road grew narrower, the pavement crumbling into gravel that crunched beneath my tires. The air inside the car felt colder, though the heater was on full blast. I told myself it was just the late hour, the fatigue settling into my bones, but that nagging instinct was back sharper now, like a blade grazing the edge of my thoughts. The destination was close, a single house at the end of a rugged driveway that looked more like a scar cut through the forest. I slowed down my headlights, sweeping across a structure that seemed to emerge from the darkness, like a forgotten relic. The house was old, its wooden siding warped, and peeling the windows dark and hollow, like empty eyes. No lights, no signs of life. Just a looming silhouette against the endless wall of trees. I parked in the gravel driveway, the engine idling, as I sat there for a moment, staring at the house. The stillness was oppressive, the kind that makes you feel like you're being watched, even when you know you're alone. I glanced at my phone, pulling up the order details to distract myself. The app required an ID check for alcohol deliveries, which meant I couldn't just leave the bottle on the porch and drive away. I'd have to face whoever lived here in this decaying house in the middle of nowhere at 1 in the morning. My heart beat a little faster, but I pushed the feeling down, grabbed the bottle, and stepped out of the car. The air outside was sharp, carrying the damp, earthy scent of the forest. Every step I took echoed in the silence, the gravel crunching under my boots like it was announcing my presence to something unseen. I scanned the house again, hoping for a flicker of light, a sign that someone was awake, but it remained dark, almost defiant in its emptiness. I reached the porch, the wood sagging under my weight, and raised my hand to knock. My knuckles hovered hesitating, as if my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. The night seemed to tighten around me, the trees pressing closer, their shadows shifting, just beyond the reach of my headlights. I knocked the sound sharp and hollow, reverberating through the house like it was empty. I waited my breath, visible in the cold air, the bottle of wine heavy in my hand. The silence stretched on unbroken, and I wondered if I'd made a mistake, if the order was a glitch or a prank. But then faintly, I heard it, a sound from within the house, slow and deliberate, like footsteps moving through the dark. My pulse quickened, and I gripped the bottle tighter, my eyes fixed on the door. Something was coming, and I wasn't sure I wanted to meet it. The door opened, and the darkness inside seemed to spill out thick and suffocating, like a living thing that wanted to swallow me whole. I stood frozen on the porch, the bottle of wine clutched against my chest as the blackness of the house yawned before me. No light came from within, not a single bulb, not even the faint glow of a phone screen. It was as if the house itself rejected illumination, choosing instead to cradle its secrets in shadow. The man who answered the door was barely visible. A tall, thin figure shrouded in the gloom, his face obscured, except for the faint glint of his eyes catching the reflection of my headlights. I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to sound steady. "Hey, I've got your order. Just need to check your ID for the alcohol." The words felt fragile, like they might shatter in the heavy air. The man nodded, or at least I thought he did. His movements were slow, almost mechanical, like a puppet jerked by unseen strings. His lips parted, and I caught the ghost of a smile, but the shadows hid its meaning. 1 minute, he said, his voice "Luungsa," and gravelly, each syllable dragging, like it was pulled from somewhere deep and unwilling. He turned and walked back into the house, leaving the door wide open. The hallway beyond a tunnel of darkness that seemed to stretch impossibly far. I stood there, rooted to the porch, my eyes straining to follow him. But he vanished almost immediately, swallowed by the black. The house was silent again, but it wasn't the kind of silence that feels empty. It was alive, watchful, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for me to make a move. I glanced back at my car, its headlights cutting a frail path through the night, the only thing anchoring me to the world I knew. The forest loomed around me, its trees standing like zerded sentinels, their branches swaying slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. I shifted my weight, the porch groaning beneath me, and that's when I saw it, a faint light in the woods, flickering through the trees, like a distant star. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there, glowing softly about 100 yards away. My first thought was that it was a porch light from another house, but that didn't make sense. The app had said this was the only house for miles, and the light was too unsteady, too alive, like it was moving. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, but the darkness seemed to distort everything, making the light feel closer one moment and impossibly far the next. I told myself to focus, to stay calm. I checked the app again, scrolling through the order details to keep my hands busy. The delivery instructions were blank. No notes, no special requests, just the address and the ID check requirement. I glanced back at the open door, the hallway still empty, still silent. How long did it take to grab a wallet? My mind started to wander, conjuring images of the man stumbling through the dark, his hands fumbling over unseen objects, or worse, standing just out of sight, watching me. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the thought, but it clung like damp moss. The light in the woods flickered again, and this time it was closer. Not much, maybe 10 feet, but enough to make my skin prickle. It wasn't a porch light. It couldn't be. It swayed gently, like someone was holding a flashlight, their hand trembling as they pointed it toward the house, toward me. My breath caught, and I took a step back, the bottle of wine slipping slightly in my sweaty grip. The forest was still no sounds of footsteps or rustling leaves, just that single, unblinking light staring at me through the trees. I turned back to the house, my heart thudding in my chest. The hallway was still empty, but the air felt heavier, now charged with something I couldn't name. I wanted to call out, to ask if the man was coming back, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. Instead, I took another step back, my boots scraping against the porch. The light in the woods moved again, sharper this time, like it was reacting to my movement. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it. Maybe a hunter, maybe a neighbor, but the explanations felt hollow, like lies I was telling myself to stay sane. I glanced at my car again, its headlights now seeming pitifully small against the vast darkness of the forest. The thought of running back to it, of driving away and leaving the bottle on the porch was tempting, but I needed the money, and abandoning an order could get me deactivated. I forced myself to stay, to wait, but every second felt like a weight pressing down on me. The light in the woods was closer now, maybe 50 feet away, and I could almost make out its shape, a single pale glow, steady but alive, like an eye watching me from the dark. The darkness inside the house wasn't just an absence of light. It was a presence, thick and heavy, like it was waiting for me to step inside. The man still hadn't returned, and the open door seemed to mock me, daring me to cross the threshold. I stood on the porch, the bottle of wine growing heavy in my hands, my eyes darting between the black hallway and the flickering light in the woods. My breath was shallow, each inhale tasting of damp wood and cold earth, the forest scent pressing against me like an unwanted touch. I called out my voice, barely above a whisper. "Hey, you got that ID?" The words felt useless, swallowed by the house's silence. No response came, but the air seemed to shift, like the house was listening, weighing my presence. I took a step closer to the door, peering into the darkness, my eyes straining to make out any shape, any sign of the man. The hallway was a void, but I could feel something there, something just beyond my sight, watching me as intently as I was watching it. The light in the woods moved again, and this time it was unmistakable. It wasn't just closer, it was approaching. The glow swayed rhythmically, like someone walking with purpose, their steps silent but deliberate. My heart pounded each beat, echoing in my ears like a drum. I stepped back, my boots catching on the uneven porch, and the bottle nearly slipped from my hands. I caught it at the last second, clutching it to my chest like a shield. The light was maybe 30 feet away now, close enough that I could see it wasn't a flashlight. It was too soft, too pale, almost like the glow of a candle or a lantern. I forced myself to focus on the house, to ignore the light, but it was impossible. The two unknowns, The man inside and the glow outside felt connected, like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. I called out again, louder, this time my voice cracking. "Hey, I need to see that ID, or I'm leaving." The threat felt empty, but it was all I had. The silence answered me heavy and unbroken. But then, faintly, I heard it. A soft, deliberate sound from inside the house. Footsteps slow and measured, coming closer. My eyes snapped to the hallway, my body tensing as the sound grew louder. The man was coming back, or so I hoped. But the footsteps were wrong. Too slow, too careful, like someone trying not to be heard. I backed up until my heels hit the edge of the porch. My gaze locked on the doorway. The light in the woods was still moving closer now, maybe 20 feet away, and I could almost make out a shape behind it. A silhouette, tall and thin, mirroring the man who'd answered the door. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs felt heavy, rooted to the spot by a mix of fear and curiosity. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, from the darkness of the hallway, the man appeared. He was taller than I remembered his frame, gaunt and angular, his face still hidden in shadow. He stood just inside the doorway, motionless, his eyes glinting faintly in the light from my car. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at me. His presence filling the air with a weight that made it hard to breathe. I held up the bottle, my hand trembling. "Your ID," I said, my voice barely audible. "I need to see it." He tilted his head, the movement slow and unnatural, like a predator sizing up its prey. "It's inside," he said, his voice low and rough, each word dripping with a strange, deliberate calm. He gestured toward the hallway, his arm extending into the dark, inviting me to follow. My stomach dropped every instinct, screaming that stepping into that house would be a mistake I wouldn't come back from. I shook my head, stepping back further, the gravel crunching under my boots. The light in the woods was now so close I could feel its presence like a cold breath on the back of my neck. I glanced over my shoulder, and my blood ran cold. The glow was no more than 10 feet away, hovering just beyond the tree line. And I could see it clearly now, a single pale light floating without a source, like it was held by something that wasn't there. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but there was no logic, only fear, raw and overwhelming. The light in the woods wasn't just watching me. It was hunting me. And the man in the doorway was its partner, their silence, a trap closing around me. I stumbled back, my boots slipping on the gravel as I retreated from the porch. The man in the doorway didn't move, but his eyes followed me, unblinking, their faint glint like a predator's in the dark. The bottle of wine was still in my hands, its weight now a burden I wanted to drop, but I couldn't let go. Not yet. My car was only a few steps away, its headlights a beacon of safety, but the distance felt like miles, the air thick with an unseen force that pressed against me. The light in the woods moved again, faster this time, darting between the trees, like it was circling me. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud, drowning out the silence of the forest. The man in the doorway took a step forward, his foot crossing the threshold, and that was enough to snap me out of my paralysis. I turned and ran my boots pounding against the gravel, the bottle still clutched against my chest. The car was so close, but the light was closer. Its glow now, a sickly yellow, pulsing like a heartbeat. I reached the car, yanking the door open and throwing myself inside. The bottle clattered onto the passenger seat as I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. The man was still on the porch, his silhouette framed against the open doorway. But he wasn't alone anymore. The light from the woods had reached the edge of the driveway, hovering just beyond the gravel, and I could see it clearly now, a shape vague and distorted, like a figure made of smoke, holding a light that seemed to burn without flame. I turned the key, the engine roaring to life, and floored the gas. The tires spun, kicking up gravel, as I tore out of the driveway, the headlights sweeping wildly across the trees. The man on the porch didn't move, but the light followed me, its glow flickering in my rearview mirror, darting through the forest like it was keeping pace. My heart was in my throat, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The road was narrow, the trees closing in their branches, scraping against the car like fingers trying to hold me back. I drove blindly, the GPS forgotten, my only goal to put as much distance as possible between me and that house. The light in the mirror grew fainter, but it never disappeared, always there, just at the edge of my vision. My mind was a storm of panic, replaying the man's voice, the darkness of the house, the way the light had moved with purpose, like it knew me, like it wanted me. I didn't stop until I reached the gas station, its fluorescent lights a harsh contrast to the darkness I'd escaped. I parked my hands, still trembling, and sat there trying to catch my breath, trying to convince myself it wasn't real, but it was real. And I knew it. The memory of that house, that man, that light it, clung to me a weight I couldn't shake. I didn't finish my shift that night. I drove home, the bottle of wine still on the passenger seat, its label staring at me like an accusation. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about it, the images looping in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I'd overreacted, but the fear was too raw, too vivid. The house wasn't just abandoned. It was a grave, and I'd stood at its edge, staring into something that wasn't supposed to exist. Days later, the memory of that night still haunted me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. I couldn't let it go, so I started digging, searching online for anything about that house, that address, hoping to find proof that it was just a strange delivery gone wrong. What I found was worse than I could have imagined. The house had been abandoned for over 50 years, its last residents long gone, their story lost to time. There were no records of anyone living there, no utilities, no neighbors, nothing. The land was supposed to be vacant, a forgotten patch of forest with no roads leading to it, no reason for anyone to be there. But I'd been there. I'd stood on that porch, spoken to that man, seen that light. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of it, but the pieces didn't fit. I found a forum post buried deep in an obscure corner of the internet from someone who'd driven past that same road years ago. They described a light in the woods, moving without a source, and a feeling of being watched, hunted. They hadn't stopped, hadn't seen the house, but their words echoed my own fear, a mirror to the nightmare I'd lived. There were others too, stories of drivers who'd taken that road and never returned, their cars found abandoned, their fates unknown. I didn't sleep that night or the next. The bottle of wine sat on my kitchen counter, untouched, a reminder of what I'd escaped. I kept seeing the man's face, or what little I'd seen of it, his eyes glinting in the dark. I kept seeing the light moving closer, always closer, like it was still out there, waiting for me to come back. I stopped driving for DoorDash after that. The money wasn't worth it, not when I could still feel the weight of that house, that forest pressing against me. I don't know what was in that house, or what carried that light through the woods. I don't know if they were connected, or if they were something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist. All I know is that I was lucky to leave. Lucky to drive away before whatever was waiting for me could close the trap. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the shadows grow long, I feel it again. That sense of being watched, of something waiting just beyond the light, ready to step out of the dark. The forest held its breath as I stepped out of my car, the crunch of gravel under my boots swallowed by an oppressive silence. I'd driven 3 hours to my older brother's cabin, nestled deep in a labyrinth of pine and shadow, to watch his dog, Cooper, while he was away on a work trip. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a primal smell that clung to the back of my throat. The cabin loomed ahead, a sturdy wooden structure that seemed to blend into the trees, its windows like dark, unblinking eyes. My brother called it a cabin, but it was more like a house, sprawling, isolated, with a presence that felt alive in the worst way possible. I wasn't prepared for how heavy the quiet would feel. Growing up in the city, I was used to noise, car horns, distant sirens, the hum of life. Here, the absence of sound was a weight pressing against my chest, making every heartbeat louder than it should be. Cooper, a young German shepherd mix, bounded out of the car, his tail wagging, oblivious to the unease that was already creeping into my bones. His fur gleamed under the fading sunlight, a stark contrast to the gloom that seemed to seep from the forest itself. My brother had warned me about the isolation. "It's peaceful," he'd said, his voice crackling over the phone. "You'll love it. Just you, Cooper, and the woods." Peaceful wasn't the word I'd use. The trees stood too close together, their branches weaving a canopy that choked out the sky. As I unloaded my bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, hidden just beyond the tree line. I told myself it was just the strangeness of being out here so far from anything familiar. But the feeling lingered like a cold hand brushing the back of my neck. Inside the cabin was warm, almost suffocatingly so. The living room smelled of cedar and old books, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. My brother's taste was eclectic shelves, lined with dog-eared paperbacks, a worn leather couch, and a record player that looked like it belonged in another decade. Cooper trotted in, sniffing every corner, his claws clicking softly on the hardwood floor. I set my bag down and tried to settle in, but the silence followed me inside. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that made you strain to hear something, anything, to prove you weren't alone. I spent the afternoon catching up with my brother before he left. He was his usual self, all easy smiles and practical advice. Feed Cooper twice a day. Don't let him wander too far. And don't worry about the noises. At night, woods are full of critters. His truck rumbled away at 3 o'clock, leaving me with Cooper and a growing sense of unease. I tried to distract myself, flipping through one of his books, but the words blurred together. My eyes kept drifting to the windows, where the forest seemed to press closer with every passing minute. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the cabin took on a different character. The warm glow of the lamps couldn't push back the darkness outside. I decided to light a fire, hoping it would make the place feel less like a tomb. Cooper curled up by the hearth, his eyes half closed, but even he seemed alert, his ears twitching at sounds I couldn't hear. I told myself it was nothing, just the wind or a branch scraping against the roof. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The forest wasn't just quiet. It was waiting. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the walls. I sat on the couch, trying to focus on the warmth, but my mind kept wandering to stories I'd heard as a kid, tales of things that lived in the woods, things that didn't belong to the world we knew. I laughed it off, but the sound felt hollow. Swallowed by the cabin's heavy air, Cooper lifted his head, staring at the front door. His ears were up, his body tense. I followed his gaze, my pulse quickening. There was nothing there, just the solid oak door locked tight. But for a moment, I could have sworn I saw the handle twitch. I shook my head, trying to anchor myself in reality. It's just a dog. Being a dog, I thought. Cooper was young, barely 2 years old, with a sharp nose and sharper instincts. If there was something out there, he'd know. I called his name, patting the couch beside me. He didn't move his eyes, fixed on the door, a low rumble building in his throat. The sound sent a chill through me, not because it was loud, but because it was so deliberate, so focused. Whatever he sensed, it wasn't just a raccoon or a deer. I got up and checked the locks, my hands shaking slightly. The windows were secure, the curtains drawn. I peered through the peephole, expecting to see nothing but darkness, and I did nothing but an endless void, as if the world outside had been erased. I stepped back, my breath shallow. Cooper's growl grew louder, more insistent. I knelt beside him, stroking his fur, trying to calm him down. "It's okay, Coupe," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I wasn't convincing either of us. The fire popped, making me jump. I laughed nervously, but the sound died in my throat. Outside, the wind picked up a low moan that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I told myself it was just the forest settling into night, but the hairs on my arms stood on end. Cooper's growl turned into a sharp bark, and he sprang to his feet, his body rigid. I followed his gaze to the window, this time where the curtains swayed slightly, as if something had brushed against the glass. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The logical part of my mind screamed that it was just the wind, but the primal part, the part that knew fear before reason, told me to run. I didn't move. I couldn't. Cooper's barks echoed through the cabin, each one a jolt to my nerves. I forced myself to walk to the window, my legs heavy, like I was moving through water. I pulled the curtain aside just an inch and peered out. The darkness was absolute. No moon, no stars, just a wall of black that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I squinted, trying to make out shapes, but there was nothing, just an endless void that seemed to stare back. I let the curtain fall, my hands trembling. Cooper was still barking, his eyes locked on the window now. I grabbed my phone, checking the signal. 1 bar. Enough to call my brother if I needed to, but the thought of explaining this to him felt ridiculous. What would I say? That his dog was freaking out over nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I could feel it, a pressure in the air, like the cabin was holding its breath. I sat back down, pulling Cooper close, his warmth, a small comfort against the growing dread. The fire was dying now. The flames reduced to embers. I didn't want to get up to add more wood. I didn't want to move at all. The forest was out there, vast and unknowable, and I was alone in this tiny pocket of light, with only a dog to keep me sane. I tried to focus on Cooper, on his steady breathing, but my mind kept circling back to the door, the window, the darkness. Every creak of the cabin felt like a warning, every gust of wind like a whisper. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I'd laugh about this tomorrow. But deep down, I knew the truth. The forest wasn't empty. Something was out there, and it was closer than I wanted to believe. The darkness outside the cabin wasn't just night. It was a living thing, pressing against the windows, seeping through the cracks. I sat on the couch, Cooper's head resting on my lap, his eyes still darting toward the door every few minutes. The fire had gone out completely, leaving the room bathed in the dim glow of a single lamp. I'd turned on a horror movie, thinking it might distract me from the unease that had settled in my chest like a stone. Irony, I suppose, watching fictional terror to escape the real thing. The movie's soundtrack droned on, all eerie strings and sudden jump scares, but it couldn't drown out the sounds of the cabin. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside felt like a message meant for me. Cooper's ears twitched, his body tense, even in rest. I stroked his fur, trying to ground myself, but my hands were clammy, my pulse uneven. The forest was too quiet, too still, like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a mistake. I glanced at the clock. 9:30 p.m. The night stretched ahead, endless and suffocating. I tried to focus on the movie, but my eyes kept drifting to the windows, to the door, to the shadows that seemed to shift just out of sight. Cooper stirred, lifting his head, his gaze fixed on the front door again. This time, he didn't growl, but his silence was worse. It was the silence of a predator sizing up its prey, calculating waiting. I called his name softly. "Cooper, you okay, buddy?" He didn't respond, didn't even look at me. His ears were pinned back, his body rigid. I followed his gaze, my stomach twisting. The door was still locked, the handle still. But something felt wrong, like the air had thickened, grown heavy with intent. I stood my legs, unsteady, and walked to the door with my hand hovering over the lock. I don't know why I did it. Some instinct, some need to prove to myself that nothing was out there. I pressed my eye to the peephole, expecting the same void I'd seen before. But this time, there was something a faint flicker, like a shadow, passing through the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but it left behind a chill that sank into my bones. I stepped back, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it over the movie's soundtrack. Cooper was on his feet now. His hackles raised a low growl, rumbling deep in his chest. I turned off the movie, the sudden silence deafening. The cabin felt smaller, the walls closing in. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the switch. The beam cut through the gloom, but it only made the shadows sharper, more menacing. I moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside, just enough to shine the light outside. The forest stared back, unyielding its secrets buried in the dark. Nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the trees standing like silent sentinels. I let the curtain fall, my breath ragged. Cooper was still growling, his eyes locked on the door. I knelt beside him, whispering reassurances I didn't believe. "It's okay, Coupe. We're fine." But we weren't. The air was charged electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. I could feel it. Something was out there, circling, watching. I tried to distract myself, pacing the living room, checking the windows, the locks, anything to keep my hands busy. But every sound was amplified, the creak of the floor, the hum of the fridge, the faint whistle of wind through the trees. I sat back down, pulling Cooper, close, his warmth a fragile anchor. The clock ticked on each second, stretching into eternity. I told myself to relax, to breathe, but my body wouldn't listen. My skin prickled my senses on high alert. Then it came a sound, faint but unmistakable. A soft tap, like a knuckle against glass, coming from the kitchen. My heart stopped. Cooper's head snapped toward the sound, his growl turning into a sharp bark. I froze. Every muscle tensed, my mind racing. It was probably nothing, I told myself. A branch, an animal, something normal. But Cooper's reaction told me otherwise. He was on his feet, his body angled toward the kitchen, his barks echoing through the cabin. I grabbed the flashlight and crept toward the kitchen, my pulse hammering in my ears. The beam shook in my hand, casting jagged shadows on the walls. The kitchen was empty, the counters gleaming faintly in the dim light. The window above the sink was closed, the glass undisturbed. But the tapping came again, louder. This time, a deliberate rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't random. It wasn't natural. I shone the flashlight at the window, my breath shallow. The glass reflected the beam, but beyond it, the darkness was impenetrable. I stepped closer, my shoes squeaking on the linoleum. The tapping stopped, replaced by silence, so heavy it felt like a physical weight. Cooper was beside me. Now, his teeth bared, his growls low and guttural. I reached for the curtain, my hand trembling, and pulled it aside. Nothing. Just the forest, endless and unyielding. But the air felt wrong, like it was charged with static. I let the curtain fall, my heart racing. Cooper's growls grew louder, more urgent. I backed away from the window, my mind screaming at me to run, to hide, to do anything but stand there. But I couldn't move. The tapping had stopped, but the silence was worse. It was the silence of something waiting, something watching something that knew I was afraid. I dragged Cooper back to the living room, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. I sat on the couch, pulling him close, his warmth a small comfort against the terror clawing at my chest. The clock read 10:15 p.m. The night was still young, and I was already unraveling. I tried to focus on Cooper, on his steady breathing, but my mind kept replaying the tapping, the shadow, the way the forest seemed to breathe with me. I turned the TV back on, cranking the volume to drown out the silence. But it didn't help. The cabin felt alive, its walls whispering secrets I couldn't hear. Cooper's ears twitched, his body tense, his eyes darting between the door and the window. I wanted to call my brother, to hear a human voice. But the signal was gone now, the single bar replaced by a mocking no service. I was alone, truly alone, with only a dog to keep me from falling apart. The hours dragged on, each one heavier than the last. I didn't sleep, didn't dare close my eyes. Cooper stayed by my side, his presence the only thing keeping me grounded. But even he couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, waiting for its moment. The forest wasn't just a place. It was a presence, a force, and it had its eyes on me. The morning sun clawed its way through the trees, casting long, jagged shadows across the cabin's floor. I'd survived the night, but it didn't feel like a victory. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, my body heavy with exhaustion. Cooper lay sprawled on the rug, his chest rising and falling, but even in sleep, his ears twitched, alert to sounds I couldn't hear. The cabin was quiet now. The oppressive weight of the night lifted slightly, but the memory of that tapping, that shadow, lingered like a bruise. I brewed coffee, the bitter aroma grounding me in the mundane. The kitchen felt different in the daylight, less like a trap and more like a room. I opened the curtains, letting the sun flood in, but the forest outside still looked wrong, too dense, too still, like it was holding its breath. Cooper stirred, trotting over to nudge my leg, his tail wagging faintly. I scratched his ears, grateful for his presence. He was the only thing keeping me sane. I decided to spend the day outside, hoping the sunlight would chase away the dread. I leashed Cooper and stepped onto the porch, the air crisp and sharp with the scent of pine. The forest was beautiful in its way, all golden light and rustling leaves, but it felt like a mask hiding something darker beneath. I walked the perimeter of the cabin, Cooper tugging at the leash, his nose to the ground. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the underbrush made my heart skip. I told myself it was just animals, just the forest waking up, but the unease from last night clung to me like damp clothes. We didn't venture far. The trees were too thick, their branches tangling overhead, creating tunnels of shadow, even in daylight. I kept close to the cabin, my eyes scanning the tree line for anything out of place. Cooper seemed fine chasing scents, but I noticed he stayed closer than usual, his body brushing against my leg. He sensed it, too. The wrongness of this place, the feeling that we weren't alone. Back inside, I tried to distract myself. I cleaned the kitchen, reorganized my brother's books, anything to keep my hands busy. But my mind kept drifting to the tapping, to the way Cooper had stared at the door. I checked my phone again. No signal. The isolation was suffocating a reminder of how far I was from help. I thought about driving into town, but the idea of leaving the cabin felt wrong, like stepping out of a fortress into enemy territory. As the afternoon wore on, the light began to fade, the sun sinking behind the trees. The cabin grew dim, the shadows stretching longer, sharper. I lit the fire again, the crackle of the flames, a small comfort Cooper curled up beside me, his head on my knee, but his eyes were alert, darting to the windows every few minutes. I tried to read, but the words swam on the page, my mind too restless to focus. The forest was quiet again. Too quiet. No birds. No wind. Just a heavy silence that pressed against the walls. I kept the curtains drawn, not wanting to see the darkness outside. But I could feel it, a presence that seemed to grow stronger with every passing hour. I told myself I was being paranoid, that last night was just my imagination running wild. But Cooper's unease told a different story. He wasn't just a dog. He was a German shepherd, bred to sense danger to protect. And he was afraid. I turned on the TV again, flipping to another movie, but the sound felt hollow, like it was being swallowed by the cabin. I kept the volume low, straining to hear anything out of place. Cooper's ears twitched, his body tense. I stroked his fur, whispering reassurances, but my voice sounded weak, unconvincing. The clock ticked, on each second a step closer to night. I didn't want to face another one, didn't want to feel that weight again, but there was no escape. The forest was all around us, vast and unyielding. Then it came again, the tapping. Faint at first, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Tap, 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 coming from the kitchen. My blood ran cold. Cooper was on his feet in an instant, his barks shattering the silence. I grabbed the flashlight, my hands shaking, and moved toward the kitchen. Cooper at my heels. The beam cut through the darkness, but it only made the shadows deeper, more menacing. The kitchen was empty. The window closed, the counters bare. But the tapping continued louder, now more insistent. It wasn't random. It had purpose, intent. I shone the flashlight at the window, my heart pounding. The glass was clear, reflecting the beam back at me. But beyond it, the darkness seemed to move, to shift, like something was just out of sight. I stepped closer, my breath hitching. Cooper's barks grew frantic, his body pressed against my leg. I reached for the curtain, my hand trembling, and pulled it aside. The forest stared back, a wall of black that seemed to pulse with life. I squinted, trying to see, but there was nothing, just the endless void. And then, for a split second, I saw it, a flicker of movement, a shape in the darkness, too quick to make out. I dropped the curtain, my heart racing. Cooper's barks echoed through the cabin, each one a jolt to my nerves. I backed away from the window, my mind screaming at me to run, to hide, to do anything but stand there. But there was nowhere to go. The cabin was my only shelter, and even that felt like a trap. I dragged Cooper back to the living room, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. I sat on the couch, pulling him close, his warmth a fragile anchor against the terror clawing at my chest. The tapping had stopped, but the silence was worse. It was the silence of something waiting, something watching, something that knew I was afraid. The night stretched ahead, endless and suffocating, and I knew it wasn't over. Whatever was out there, it was getting closer. The cabin was no longer a refuge. It was a cage, and the forest was tightening its grip. I sat on the couch, Cooper pressed against me, his body trembling with barely contained energy. The tapping had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse, a heavy, oppressive void that seemed to pulse with malice. The clock read 11:00 p.m., and the night felt like it was closing in the walls of the cabin, shrinking with every breath I took. I kept the flashlight in my hand, its beam pointed at the floor, casting a small circle of light that felt like my only defense. Cooper's ears were up, his eyes darting between the door and the window. His growls were low, almost inaudible, but they vibrated through me, a warning I couldn't ignore. I tried to focus on the TV, on the movie's flickering images, but it was useless. The cabin was alive with sound. Now, not the tapping, but subtler things. The creak of the floorboards, the faint rustle of leaves outside the low moan of the wind. I checked my phone again. No signal. The isolation was absolute, a reminder that I was cut off from the world, trapped in this wooden box surrounded by trees. I thought about my brother, about how he'd lived here for years, without issue. Was I losing it? Was this just my city-bred paranoia, amplified by the strangeness of the forest? But Cooper's behavior told me otherwise. He wasn't imagining things. He was reacting to something real, something I couldn't see, but could feel like a pressure in the air. I stood pacing the living room, trying to shake off the dread. Cooper followed his eyes, never leaving the windows. I checked the locks again, my hands moving on autopilot. The door was secure, the windows shut tight, but it didn't matter. The forest was out there, vast and unknowable, and it felt like it was seeping into the cabin, through the cracks, through the walls, through the very air I breathed. I decided to move to the bedroom, hoping a change of scenery would help. The room was small, with a single bed, a nightstand, and a small TV mounted on the wall. I turned it on the low hum of static, a small comfort. Cooper jumped onto the bed, his body still tense, his ears twitching. I sat beside him, trying to focus on the movie. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying the tapping, the shadow, the way the forest seemed to watch me. The night dragged on each minute, heavier than the last. I kept the flashlight close, its beam a lifeline in the dark. Cooper's growls had stopped, but his eyes were alert, his body ready to spring. I tried to talk to him, to fill the silence with words, but my voice sounded hollow, like it was being swallowed by the cabin. The forest was out there, waiting, and I could feel its presence like a predator circling its prey. Then it came a new sound, not tapping, but a low, hollow thump, like something heavy hitting the outside of the cabin. My heart stopped. Cooper is on his feet, his barks shattering the silence. The sound came again, louder, more deliberate, from the direction of the kitchen. I grabbed the flashlight, my hands shaking, and moved toward the door, Cooper at my heels. The beam cut through the darkness, but it only made the shadows deeper, more menacing. The kitchen was empty, the window closed, the counters bare. But the thumping continued, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo inside my skull. I shone the flashlight at the window, my breath shallow. The glass was clear, reflecting the beam back at me. But beyond it, the darkness seemed to move, to shift, like something was just out of sight. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, and pulled the curtain aside. For a moment, I thought I saw something, a shape tall and thin, standing just beyond the tree line. It was gone in an instant, swallowed by the darkness, but the image burned into my mind. Cooper's barks grew frantic, his body pressed against my leg. I dropped the curtain, my hands trembling, and backed away from the window. The thumping stopped, replaced by silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. I dragged Cooper back to the bedroom, my mind racing. I locked the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls closing in the air, thick with fear. I sat on the bed, pulling Cooper close, his warmth a small comfort against the terror clawing at my chest. The clock read 11:45 p.m. The night was far from over, and I knew whatever was out there wasn't done with us. The cabin was a trap, and I was the prey. The thumping had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse, a suffocating void that seemed to pulse with intent. I sat on the bed, Cooper pressed against me, his body trembling with barely contained energy. The flashlight was still in my hand, its beam pointed at the door, as if light could keep whatever was out there at bay. The clock read midnight, and the night felt like it was stretching into eternity, each second heavier than the last. I tried to focus on Cooper, on his steady breathing, but my mind was racing, replaying the shape I'd seen outside the thumping, the way the forest seemed to breathe with me. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination, but Cooper's behavior told a different story. His ears were up, his eyes locked on the door, his growls low and guttural. He wasn't just a dog, he was a protector, and he was afraid. I checked the locks again, my hands moving on autopilot. The bedroom door was secure, the windows shut tight, but it didn't matter. The forest was out there, vast and unknowable, and it felt like it was inside the cabin, now seeping through the walls, through the air, through my skin. I sat back down, pulling Cooper close, his warmth a fragile anchor against the terror clawing at my chest. Then it came, a sound that shattered the silence. A loud, hollow thump, followed by another and another, coming from the wall behind me. My heart stopped. Cooper was on his feet, his barks deafening, his body angled toward the door. The thumping grew louder, more insistent, like something was trying to break through. I grabbed the flashlight, my hands shaking, and shone it at the door. But the beam only made the shadows deeper, more menacing. Then, without warning, the door swung open. Not slowly, not cautiously, but with a violent jerk, as if something had forced it from the other side. Cooper lunged forward, his barks turning into a snarl, and before I could stop him, he was gone, sprinting down the hallway. I screamed his name, my voice raw, but he didn't stop. I ran after him, the flashlight bouncing in my hand, the beam cutting wildly through the darkness. The front door was open now, a gaping maw leading into the night. Cooper's barks echoed from outside, growing fainter as he ran into the forest. I grabbed a jacket, my shoes, anything to keep up, and sprinted after him, the flashlight's beam slicing through the darkness. The forest swallowed me whole, the trees closing in their branches, clawing at my face. Cooper's barks were my only guide, faint but desperate, pulling me deeper into the void. The air was cold, sharp, cutting into my lungs with every breath. The ground was uneven roots and rocks tripping me as I ran. The flashlight's beam danced wildly, illuminating twisted branches, gnarled trunks, but nothing else. No Cooper, no shape, no answers. The forest was alive, its silence broken only by my ragged breathing and the distant sound of Cooper's barks. I called his name, my voice hoarse, but it was swallowed by the trees, lost in the darkness. I don't know how long I ran, minutes, hours. It all blurred together. The forest was endless, a maze of shadows and secrets. Cooper's barks grew fainter, then stopped altogether. I froze, my heart pounding. the flashlight shaking in my hand. The silence was absolute, a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed against my chest. I called for Cooper again, my voice breaking, but there was no response. Just the rustle of leaves, the faint moan of the wind. Then I heard it, a sound faint but unmistakable. The crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig coming from behind me. I spun around the flashlight's beam, cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing. Just trees, endless and unyielding. My breath hitched my pulse, racing. I called for Cooper again, my voice trembling, but the forest answered with silence. I stood there alone in the dark, the flashlight my only lifeline. The air was thick with the scent of pine and decay, the ground cold beneath my feet. I felt it then, a presence, not just the forest, but something else, something that didn't belong. It was watching me, circling me, its eyes hidden in the shadows. I backed away, my heart pounding, the flashlight's beam shaking in my hand. Then, out of the darkness, Cooper came running. His tail was tucked, his eyes wide with fear, a low whimper escaping his throat. He pressed against me, his body trembling, and I could feel his terror raw and primal. I shone the flashlight behind him into the darkness he'd come from. But there was nothing, just the endless void of the forest. I grabbed his collar, my hands shaking, and ran back toward the cabin, the flashlight's beam bouncing wildly. The forest seemed to close in the trees, leaning closer, their branches clawing at me. Cooper stayed close, his whimpers a constant reminder of the danger we'd escaped. When we reached the cabin, I slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. The silence was back, but it wasn't empty. It was alive, pulsing with intent. The cabin was no longer a home. It was a battlefield, and I was losing. I sat on the floor, my back against the door. Cooper pressed against me, his body still trembling. The flashlight was still in my hand, its beam pointed at the ceiling, casting long, jagged shadows across the room. The clock read, but time felt meaningless, swallowed by the endless night. The forest was out there, waiting its presence, a weight I could feel in my bones. I called 911, my voice shaking as I explained what had happened. The tapping, the thumping, the open door, Cooper's chase into the forest. The operator was calm, professional, but her voice felt distant, like it was coming from another world. She promised help was on the way, but the nearest town was miles away, and I knew it would be hours before anyone arrived. I called my brother next, leaving a rambling voicemail, my words tripping over themselves as I tried to make sense of the terror. Cooper whimpered, his head resting on my lap, his eyes darting to the windows. I stroked his fur, trying to calm him, but my hands were shaking, my heart still racing. The cabin was quiet now, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the quiet of a predator, waiting for its moment, biding its time. I checked the locks again, my hands moving on autopilot, but it didn't matter. The forest had already breached the cabin, its presence seeping through the walls, through the air, through my skin. I moved to the bedroom, locking the door behind me, Cooper at my heels. I turned on the small TV, the hum of static, a small comfort against the silence. I sat on the bed, pulling Cooper close, his warmth a fragile anchor against the terror clawing at my chest. The night stretched on each minute, heavier than the last. I didn't sleep, didn't dare close my eyes. The forest was out there, and it wasn't done with us. When help finally arrived, it was nearly dawn. The police searched the cabin, the forest, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of a break-in. Just the open door and my own frantic story. They were kind, but skeptical, their eyes lingering on me, like I was the one who didn't belong. I didn't care. I just wanted to leave, to escape the forest and its secrets. My brother returned the next day, his face pale as I told him what had happened. He didn't question me, didn't doubt me. He just hugged me, his arms tight, and promised to never leave me alone in the cabin again. We took Cooper to a hotel that night. The sterile lights and hum of civilization, a stark contrast to the darkness we'd left behind. Cooper was quiet, his tail still tucked, his eyes haunted. It took weeks for him to recover, for the fear to fade from his gaze. Looking back, I don't know what was out there. A person, a thing, something else entirely. But I know it was real. I felt it. Cooper felt it, and the forest knew it too. The cabin was supposed to be a refuge, a place of peace, but it was a lie. The forest was alive, and it had claimed us, even if just for a night. I still see Cooper when I visit my brother, his fur grayer, now his eyes softer. But I'll never forget what he did for me, how he chased the darkness away. And I'll never go back to that cabin, not for anything. The dashboard clock blinked 11:47 p.m. Its pale green glow, the only light piercing the suffocating darkness of the rural road. My eyelids sagged heavy as lead, each blink threatening to drag me into sleep. The hum of the engine was a lullaby, monotonous, relentless, pulling me deeper into a haze. but something felt wrong, off, like the air itself was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the sense that the road was watching me, waiting for me to falter. Every shadow beyond my headlights twisted into shapes that didn't belong human-animal, something else. I turned up the radio static, crackling like whispers in the void, but it didn't help. The night wasn't just dark. It was alive, and it knew I was alone. The city lights had long faded in my rearview mirror, replaced by an endless stretch of asphalt, flanked by dense, silent trees. I'd been driving for nearly an hour, the weight of a 12-hour shift at the warehouse pressing into my bones. My job wasn't glamorous. Stacking boxes, scanning barcodes, dodging forklifts. But it paid the bills. Usually, I took the train to avoid this grueling drive. But tonight's overtime had kept me past the last train's schedule. Now here I was, navigating a road so desolate, it felt like the world had forgotten it existed. The air inside the car was stale, thick, with the scent of coffee from the thermos I'd drained an hour ago. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale as I fought the fog in my mind. The road stretched on unchanging, a black ribbon, unspooling into nothingness. No street lights, no signs, just the occasional flicker of my high beams catching the reflective eyes of some unseen creature in the underbrush. I tried to focus, counting the mile markers to stay awake, but they blurred together. 1, 2, 3. My thoughts drifted memories of the day's monotony, mixing with the hum of the tires. I'd done this drive 100 times, but tonight felt different. The silence wasn't just quiet. It was oppressive, like a weight pressing against my chest. I cracked the window, letting in a rush of cold air that smelled of pine and damp earth, hoping it would jolt me awake. But the cold only sharpened my senses, making every rustle in the trees feel like a threat. I glanced at the clock, again 11:52 p.m. 5 minutes had passed, but it felt like hours. My phone sat useless in the passenger seat. No signal out here. No way to call for help if I needed it. Not that I thought I'd need it. Not yet. I shook my head, trying to laugh off the creeping unease. Just tired, I told myself. Just the night playing tricks. But the road didn't care about my rationalizations. It stretched on endless, unyielding, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't as alone as I thought. The first sign of something wrong came subtly, almost dismissible. A glint of metal caught my headlights off to the right, where the road's shoulder met the tree line. I slowed slightly, squinting into the dark. It was a pickup truck pulled off onto the grass, its body half swallowed by shadows. No lights, no movement, just a hulking shape, abandoned in the night. My stomach twisted, but I brushed it off. Car trouble, I thought. Someone ran out of gas, got a ride home. It wasn't uncommon out here, where gas stations were miles apart, and cell service was a gamble. I pressed the gas, letting the truck fade into the darkness behind me. But the image lingered a splinter in my mind. The road curved gently, trees crowding closer, their branches clawing at the sky. I turned the radio dial, searching for something to drown out the silence. But all I got was static, a low hiss that seemed to pulse with a rhythm of its own. I switched it off, the sudden quiet louder than before. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following me. But there was nothing. Just black. I forced myself to focus on the road, on the yellow lines flickering past, but my mind kept circling back to that truck. Why was it there? Why no lights? The questions gnawed at me, small but insistent, like a whisper I couldn't quite hear. I tried to distract myself, replaying the day in my head. The warehouse had been chaos orders, piling up, a new guy dropping a pallet of glassware, the supervisor barking over the noise. I'd stayed late to clean up the mess, my hands still smelling faintly of cardboard and sweat. I rubbed them on my jeans, the rough fabric grounding me for a moment. But the road pulled me back, its emptiness, a canvas for my growing unease. I couldn't tell if it was the exhaustion or something else, but the night felt wrong, like I'd stumbled into a place I wasn't meant to be. The trees seemed to lean closer now, their shadows weaving patterns across the road. I turned on the high beams, the light cutting deeper into the dark, but it only made the world beyond feel more impenetrable. Every few seconds, I caught myself glancing at the shoulder, expecting another abandoned vehicle, another sign that something wasn't right. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the night was just messing with my head. But deep down, I knew better. The road wasn't just a road anymore. It was a trap, and I was driving straight into it. The road seemed to tighten around me, the trees pressing in like silent sentinels, their branches scraping the edges of my vision. I'd seen the first truck, its lifeless form slumped on the roadside. But now, another shape loomed ahead, a car parked crookedly on the grass, its doors shut tight. No sign of life. My heart thudded a slow, heavy beat that echoed in my ears. Two vehicles abandoned in the middle of nowhere on a night that already felt like a nightmare. I gripped the wheel harder, my palms slick with sweat, and whispered to myself, just a coincidence. But the words felt hollow, swallowed by the dark. Something was out there, watching, waiting, and I was driving deeper into its domain. The second vehicle was a sedan, older, Its paint faded to a dull gray under the moonlight. It sat just off the road, tires sinking into the soft earth as if it had been left in a hurry. I slowed as I passed my headlights sweeping over its empty windows. No one inside, no keys dangling in the ignition, just a ghost of a car left to rot in the night. My mind raced, trying to piece together a rational explanation. Maybe a couple of locals had car trouble, called for a tow, and left their vehicles behind. Maybe they were parked here for some late-night rendezvous, a deal gone wrong, or just kids messing around. But the silence told a different story. It was too complete, too heavy, like the world was holding its breath. I accelerated the engine's roar, a brief comfort against the oppressive quiet. The sedan disappeared behind me, but its image burned into my mind, joining the pickup truck in a growing gallery of unease. Two vehicles miles apart, both abandoned, both wrong. I checked the clock, 12:03 a.m. The numbers glowed mockingly, reminding me how far I was from home, from safety. My phone still showed no bars, its screen a useless slab of glass. I cursed under my breath, the sound sharp in the confined space of the car. I needed to stay calm, to focus, but the road had other plans. The trees grew denser, now their branches interlocking overhead, forming a tunnel of shadows that swallowed my headlights. The air from the cracked window carried a chill sharp, with the scent of damp moss. And something else, something metallic, faint but unmistakable. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the road's curves. But my eyes kept darting to the sides, searching for movement. Every rustle, every snap of a twig felt like a signal, a warning I couldn't decipher. I turned the heat up, a warm air hissing through the vents, but it did little to ease the cold knot in my stomach. I thought back to a story an old coworker had told me years ago over lukewarm coffee in the break room. He'd been a trucker before the warehouse, hauling freight across these same rural routes. One night, he'd seen a car on the side of the road, much like the ones I'd passed, its hood up, no one around. He'd stopped to help, thinking it was the decent thing to do. But as he approached, he'd felt it, a presence, something watching from the trees. He'd gotten back in his rig and driven off, never looking back. Some roads don't want you to stop, he'd said, his eyes distant. I'd laughed it off, then chalking it up to too many late nights and cheap diner coffee. Now I wasn't so sure. The memory sent a shiver through me, anchoring the fear that had been building since I'd seen the first truck. I tried to shake it off, turning my focus to the road ahead, but the darkness seemed to pulse alive with possibilities I didn't want to consider. What if those vehicles weren't abandoned by choice? What if someone or something had made sure they stayed empty? My hands tightened on the wheel, the leather creaking under my grip. I was alone, miles from anywhere, with no way to call for help. The realization hit like a physical weight, pressing against my chest. I passed another mile marker, its reflective surface flashing briefly in my lights. I tried to count them again, to ground myself in something tangible, but my mind kept slipping back to the cars. Two of them, too similar, too perfectly placed. My thoughts spiraled, conjuring images of drivers stranded waiting for help that never came. I saw them in my mind's eye, faceless, desperate, their cars left as markers of their disappearance. I shook my head hard, trying to clear the images. "You're tired," I told myself. "You're making this bigger than it is." But the road didn't care about my logic. It kept pulling me forward deeper into its grasp. The air grew colder, the metallic scent stronger, now clinging to the back of my throat. I closed the window, locking out the night, but it didn't help. The darkness seemed to seep into the car, curling around me like smoke. I turned on the radio again, desperate for noise. But the static was worse now, a low growl that seemed to carry voices just beyond understanding. I switched it off, my heart pounding. The road was changing, or maybe I was. Every shadow felt like a threat, every gust of wind, a whisper of something coming closer. Something moved in the dark, just beyond the reach of my headlights. A flicker, a shape gone before I could focus. My foot eased off the gas instinct, screaming to stop, to turn back, but there was nowhere to go. The road stretched on a black vein, cutting through the forest, and I was its only pulse. Then it happened. Something solid, heavy rolled into my path, too fast to avoid. The car lurched as my right tire hit it, a sickening thud reverberating through the frame. My hands froze on the wheel. My breath caught in my throat. Whatever I'd hit wasn't an animal, wasn't debris. It was deliberate, placed there to stop me. And now, I was exactly where it wanted me. The impact jolted me fully awake, adrenaline flooding my system like ice water. I kept driving, my heart hammering, listening for the telltale wobble of a damaged tire. The car felt sluggish, the steering pulling slightly to the right. I cursed low and sharp, my voice swallowed by the hums of the engine. I hadn't seen what I'd hit. Not clearly, but the image was seared into my mind. A dark cylindrical shape, too uniform to be natural, rolling into the road, as if guided by an unseen hand. A log. A tire. Something else. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but the pieces didn't fit. I glanced at the dashboard. 12:09 a.m. The clock's glow felt mocking now, a reminder of how long I'd been out here, how far from help. The tire pressure warning light hadn't come on yet, but I could feel it, the subtle drag, the faint vibration in the wheel. I needed to stop, to check the damage, but every instinct screamed against it. The two abandoned vehicles loomed in my memory, their empty shells, a warning I couldn't ignore. What if this was how it started for them? A bump in the night, a flat tire, a moment of vulnerability in the dark. I kept driving slower, now my eyes scanning the road for more obstacles. The trees seemed closer, their branches scraping the edges of my vision, like fingers reaching for the car. The air inside felt thick, heavy, with the scent of my own sweat, and the faint metallic tang that lingered from outside. I cracked the window again, just an inch, needing the air, but dreading what it might bring. The forest was silent, too silent, the kind of quiet that hides something waiting to strike. My mind flashed to a story I'd heard as a kid, told around a campfire by my uncle, his voice low and serious. He'd spoken of roads, like this one forgotten, stretches where people vanished, their cars found days later, empty, untouched. Some places, he'd said, they're hungry. They take what they want, and they don't leave a trace. I'd laughed then, a nervous kid, giggling at ghost stories. Now the memory felt like a warning, a truth I'd ignored until it was too late. The car shuddered the right tire, finally giving way. The warning light blinked on red and insistent, confirming what I already knew. I had no choice now. I pulled over the car, crunching onto the gravel shoulder, the sound loud in the stillness. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, my hands trembling on the wheel. The headlights cut a narrow path through the dark, illuminating nothing but asphalt and the edge of the tree line. I didn't want to get out, didn't want to step into the night, but I couldn't stay here, stranded, waiting for whatever had set this trap. I took a deep breath, the air sharp in my lungs, and opened the door. The cold hit me like a slap, carrying that metallic scent, again stronger, now mixed with something sour, like decay. I stepped onto the gravel, my boots crunching the sound, echoing in the silence. I moved to the right side of the car, my phone's flashlight casting a weak beam over the tire. It was shredded, the rim scraped, and dented the rubber, hanging in tattered strips. Whatever I'd hit had done its right, and it wasn't an accident. I straightened my breath, visible in the cold air, and scanned the darkness. The trees stood like sentinels, their trunks barely visible beyond the headlight's reach. I felt exposed, a speck of light in a sea of black, and the weight of unseen eyes pressed against me. I needed to call for a tow to get out of here, but my phone was still useless, the signal dead. I was alone, miles from anywhere, with a broken car and a growing certainty that I wasn't the only one out here. He appeared like a shadow, detaching from the night, a figure moving along the tree line. His steps deliberate, too quiet to be natural. My headlights caught him for a moment. A tall, wiry frame, head-bowed hands stuffed in his pockets. But then he slipped back into the dark, as if he knew I was watching. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He wasn't just passing by. He was coming for me, drawn by the stranded car, the flat tire, the trap I'd driven into. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking the air thick with the certainty that if I didn't move now, I'd never leave this road alive. I scrambled back into the car, slamming the door and locking it, my breath ragged. The figure was closer now, maybe 100 yards away, moving along the edge of the road, his silhouette flickering in and out of the tree line. I couldn't see his face, but his movements were wrong, jerky, unsteady, like a puppet with half its strings cut. My hands fumbled with the phone. Still no signal, but I dialed 911 anyway, praying for a miracle. The call failed, the screen mocking me with its no service warning. I cursed, slamming the phone onto the passenger seat. The man was closer now, maybe 50 yards, his steps slow but relentless. My headlights caught him again, just for a second. Pale skin, hollow cheeks, eyes that seemed to glint in the dark. He didn't wave, didn't call out, just kept coming, his gaze fixed on the car. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the night, the abandoned trucks, the object in the road, the flat tire. This wasn't random. This was planned, a snare set for anyone foolish enough to drive this road alone. I turned the key, the engine sputtering to life. The car lurched forward, the damaged tire grinding against the rim. But I didn't care. I had to move, had to get away. The man stopped, his head tilting as if surprised, and then he stepped onto the road directly into my path. I swerved the car, fishtailing on the gravel, my heart in my throat. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, his eyes locked on mine through the windshield. For a moment, time seemed to freeze his gaze, boring into me, cold and unyielding, like he was looking through me into something deeper. I floored the gas, the car groaning as it limped forward. The man stepped back, fading into the trees, but his presence lingered a weight on my chest. I kept driving the tire, screaming, the rim sparking against the asphalt. My hands shook, my vision blurring with panic. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. The road stretched on endless, the trees closing in like a cage. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him following, but there was nothing, just darkness, thick and unbroken. Minutes later, I passed another car, this one different. Its door was ajar, the interior light casting a sickly yellow glow. No one was inside, but the sight sent a fresh wave of dread through me. Another trap, another victim. My mind flashed to the stories I'd read online late at night when I couldn't sleep, tales of rural roads where drivers vanished, their cars found days later, empty, their fates a mystery. I'd always dismissed them as urban legends, exaggerated for clicks. Now I wasn't so sure. I kept driving, the car shaking the tire, all but gone. The nearest town was still miles away, but I had no choice. I couldn't stop, couldn't risk it. The man's face stayed with me, his eyes burning in my memory, cold and predatory. I didn't know who he was, what he wanted, but I knew one thing: he wasn't alone. The road, the night, the abandoned cars, they were all part of something bigger, something I'd stumbled into and barely escaped. The town's lights appeared like a mirage, faint at first, then growing brighter, a lifeline pulling me out of the nightmare. I limped into the gas station lot, the car shuddering, the rim grinding against the pavement. My hands were still shaking, my breath shallow, as I stumbled out, the cold air biting my skin. I was safe, or so I thought, but the man's eyes haunted me, their cold gleam a promise of something unfinished. I didn't know what I'd escaped, but the truth was out there, hidden in the dark, and it wasn't done with me yet. I collapsed into the gas station's fluorescent glow, the clerk barely glancing up from his phone as I stammered out a request for a tow truck. My voice sounded foreign, shaky, like it belonged to someone else. The clerk nodded, made a call, and I sank onto a bench outside, the night pressing in around me. The town was small, a cluster of buildings huddled against the forest, but it felt like salvation after the road. I checked my phone. Still no signal, but the clock read 12:37 a.m. Less than an hour had passed, but it felt like a lifetime. The tow truck arrived 20 minutes later, the driver a gruff older man who didn't ask questions. He hooked up my car, muttering about the shredded tire, and I climbed into the cab, grateful for the warmth, the company, anything that wasn't the road. As we drove to the shop, I told him what happened. Not everything, just the basics. The object in the road, the flat tire, the man. He listened, his face unreadable, then said, "You're lucky. Folks don't always make it off that road." His words hung in the air, heavy, final. At the shop, I sat in the waiting area, the humps of fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the silence of the night. My car was fixed by dawn. The tire replaced, the rim patched up. I drove home, the morning light washing away the shadows, but not the memories. For days, I tried to forget, to chalk it up to exhaustion, to a tired mind playing tricks. But the man's eyes stayed with me. His gaze, a splinter I couldn't remove. Then, 4 days later, I saw the news. 2 people had gone missing on that same road the same night I'd driven it. Their cars, described as a pickup and a sedan, were found abandoned tires, damaged just like mine. The police had no leads, no suspects, only questions. I read the article again and again, my stomach churning. The vehicles matched the ones I'd seen down to their positions on the road. The object I'd hit the man who'd approached, they weren't random. They were part of a pattern, a trap set for anyone who dared drive that stretch of highway after dark. I called the police, told them everything. They listened, took notes, but their faces said it all. No evidence, no witnesses, no hope. The missing people were still gone, their fates unknown. And I was just a guy with a story too wild to believe, but I knew the truth. I'd felt it in the weight of the night, in the man's eyes, in the silence that hid something unspeakable. I'd escaped, but barely, and the road was still out there, waiting for its next traveler.